To pull off a movie like this, I seriously suspect the director is out of his mind. Who would have a woman conceive a child with her sex-changed self and then go on to kill herself? You are your own parents, your own lover, and even your own child. This is the ultimate mind-bending masterpiece in film history. Predestination. As the story begins, a mysterious man carries a briefcase in his left hand and a black violin case in his right, rushing into the basement of a New York office building. He lifts a black cloth, revealing a ticking time bomb underneath. He yanks the briefcase, which instantly transforms into a blast containment chamber. But just as the mysterious man is disarming the bomb, a figure in black suddenly appears behind him. He immediately draws his gun and fires. He turns back to see only 6 seconds left on the timer. He steps forward, grabs the bomb, and drops it into the containment unit. But before he can get the lid closed, the shockwave blasts him 40 feet away. Horribly burned, he struggles to reach for the violin case when the figure in black appears again. But this time, instead of attacking, he slides the case over to him. After the figure leaves, the mysterious man rapidly spins the dials on the case and slams it shut. When he opens his eyes, he's in a different space entirely. Seeing the 2 warning signs above him, the blown-up agent knows he's safe. Then 2 men in suits present him with a cross medal, said to be the highest honor for his bomb disposal efforts. If you look closely, the design is an hourglass, or rather a Mobius strip, symbolizing the flow of time and infinite recurring fate. This place is the government's secret temporal bureau, and the mysterious man Cross is one of its agents. In the movie, humanity invents time travel in 1981, allowing travel 53 years forward or backward, mainly used to prevent terrorist events in history. Among the many cases, the most difficult one is a psychopath known as the Fizzle Bomber. He always manages to evade the Bureau's agents and carries out large-scale terror attacks. His worst attack destroyed 10 city blocks in New York, tragically killing 11,000 people. Although Cross stopped the bomber this time, he suffered permanent injuries. After a period of reconstructive surgery, he finally looked human again, but his face was completely different from before. Also, due to long-term time travel, his brain suffered irreversible damage, causing many of his memories to blur. But even if he forgot what the bomber looked like, he firmly remembered that he had to go back for revenge. Finally, his patience paid off. Years later, Cross not only looked like a normal person, but today he also received his final time travel assignment. After this, he could retire in peace. Just when he thought he was going to catch the bomber, the organization assigned him a different mission. Cross takes the time machine back to 1970, and in a small dive bar in New York, he goes undercover working as a bartender. It isn't until his target, John, walks in that the story truly comes alive. To complete his mission, Cross deliberately strikes up a conversation. Through their chat, he finds out that John is actually a writer for a women's advice column. Cross acts surprised by this, because he's read John's articles. How does a man know women better than women do? John almost speaks but holds back. After all, he's kept this secret for years, never telling a soul, because nobody would believe his absurd experience. But this is exactly what Cross wants to hear. To push John into telling his story, he makes a bet that if the story can genuinely shock him, he'll give him a bottle of liquor on the house. It turns out John's opening line completely shatters his worldview.
When I was a little girl. What?
It all starts in the autumn of 1945. When John was still a baby girl, she was ruthlessly abandoned by a mysterious man at an orphanage doorstep. The director found the abandoned infant after receiving a phone call. After a doctor's examination, they found the baby girl was extraordinarily healthy. Although the director couldn't understand why her parents would abandon her, she decided to take the baby in and named her Jane. There were about a dozen other babies with no background at the orphanage, but Jane was the most unique existence among them. Growing up, she didn't know the meaning of getting sick, and her physique seemed naturally stronger than others. Whenever she got into conflicts with other kids, she would always gain the upper hand. Even the boys in the orphanage were no match for her. At the same time, Jane was smarter than everyone else, but her overly excellent grades also alienated her from the others. Gradually, she became a freak and an outcast in their eyes. As she got older, children in the orphanage were adopted by families one by one, but nobody ever wanted Jane. She began to hate her reflection and stopped looking in mirrors. Curled up tight in bed, Jane gradually forgot her own appearance, until one day, a man named Robertson came to the orphanage. Because of Jane's strong physique and brilliant mind, Robertson took her to Space Corp to apply for a job. In every test, Jane performed remarkably well. Whether in G-force tolerance or physical fitness, she was miles ahead of the other candidates, and she even achieved the highest score in history on the written exam. Unfortunately, Jane's excellence sparked jealousy in others. However, the consequence of a fight was something Jane didn't expect. She was actually disqualified by Space Corp, but Robertson told her he would speak to the committee and fight for a chance for Jane to return to the program. While waiting for Robertson's answer, she started looking for a way to support herself. Jane worked as a nanny during the day and attended etiquette classes at school at night. Everything she did was to prove to the committee that she had changed. It was after class one night that Jane met the man who would change her life. This was the first time she met someone with common interests and a man who understood her thoughts. Jane felt a tenderness she had never experienced before, and just like that, she fell in love. It was the happiest time of Jane's life. Sadly, good things don't last. After parting ways one day, this man left her life forever. Jane never saw him again. This blow made Jane's desire to join Space Corp even stronger. Finally, Jane received the news she was waiting for. Robertson found her again. But this time, he told Jane the truth. Space Corp's recruitment was actually just a cover. They were looking for temporal agents to travel to the future and past. After months of screening, Robertson found that only Jane had no family and no social ties. So even if she traveled to the past or future, she wouldn't alter history or cause temporal paradoxes. She perfectly fit the Bureau's principle of minimizing temporal footprints. So the job was practically made for her. Just as her life seemed to be turning around, Jane unexpectedly discovered she was pregnant. Compared to a good job, Jane chose to be a good mother, so she decided to keep the baby. Fortunately, the delivery went smoothly, and Jane successfully gave birth to a daughter. But after the surgery, the doctor came to her and told Jane a fact she found hard to accept. During the C-section, doctors discovered Jane had 2 complete sets of organs inside her, but neither had fully matured. The female organs had developed enough to bear a child, but due to massive blood loss during birth, the doctors had no choice but to remove Jane's uterus. For the sake of Jane's future life, the doctors performed reconstructive surgery. They rebuilt a male urinary system within her, transforming Jane into a man so she could continue living. Although Jane couldn't accept this reality when hearing it, the surgery was already done, and she had to face it. For her daughter, she had to live on. However, misfortunes never come singly. One night, 2 weeks later, a mysterious man stole her daughter. From that day on, Jane tried almost everything to find her, but the child, just like that deadbeat father, had vanished into thin air. Amidst overwhelming grief, Jane underwent 3 sex reassignment surgeries at the hospital. After 11 months, Jane finally completed the painful transition into a man. He began trying to speak like a man. The body in the mirror was no longer the one he knew. He started slowly changing the details of his life. Jane was no longer a woman, but he didn't know how to be a man. Every time he looked at his new appearance, he would remember the man who ruined his life. In order to survive, Jane went back to Space Corp, this time applying for an astronaut position. Unfortunately, the company had his previous files. Out of curiosity, the doctor examined his body and then rejected his application. So Jane changed his name to John and started a new life in New York, finding a job as a typist for a newspaper. By pure chance, he casually typed up a story he wrote and mailed it to a magazine. Unexpectedly, he received a substantial check for it. So John quit his job and focused on studying the most popular weekly magazines. Combining that with his own rich and bizarre experiences, he soon became a famous writer for emotional advice columns. This incredible story of John's personal experience completely stunned Cross. According to their bet, John also won the bottle of liquor as he wished. I thought the story ended there, but the truly intense plot is just beginning. John actually faces the second major turning point of his life here. Cross asks him if he could bring that man in front of John and guarantee that John could get away with it scot-free, would John choose to kill him? John's answer is not unexpected. He'd kill him right now, but he immediately dismisses it as nonsense. After all, no one easily trusts a stranger. Until Cross says he's from the Temporal Bureau and promises he will find that scumbag. But after it's done, John has to take over his job. Not as a bartender, obviously. John goes from total disbelief to skepticism and decides to give it a shot, following him to the basement. As soon as they enter, Cross takes out the same violin case from the beginning, places it on the table in front of John, and explains it, saying it's a portable space-time field kit capable of traveling 53 years forward or back from 1981. He then sets the time to April 3rd, 1963, the very day Jane met that scumbag. Suddenly, the two are transported to a dilapidated storeroom. First-time travelers usually suffer from dizziness and vomiting, but even so, John still doesn't believe they really traveled to the past until he sees the people outside dressed in 60s fashion. Only then does he believe this might be real. While he's still in shock, Cross hands him a gun and reveals the true mission. The Temporal Bureau suspects that the scumbag who abandoned John is actually the Fizzle bomber. Impatient, John wants to kill that guy right now. So he rushes to the finishing school where he used to take etiquette classes. He observes the surroundings vigilantly, trying to spot the bomber, or rather, the scumbag who hurt him back then. He starts scrutinizing everyone walking in front of him. Just then, Jane, having just finished class, accidentally bumps into John. Hearing the familiar voice behind him, John realizes this is his former self. Unexpectedly, the scumbag he loved and hated, and now wants to kill, is actually John himself. This plot twist seems absurd, but it's actually the inevitable result of multiple interwoven factors. Jane doesn't recognize that John is herself because she barely looks in mirrors, and it's even harder to recognize him after the sex change. As for why John didn't know the scumbag was himself, it's because after being abandoned back then, his brain actively suppressed the painful memories, avoiding the scumbag's face. Plus, with so much time passing, forgetting is inevitable. Now that John is facing his female self again as a man, subconsciously, he can't help but hope to act as the ideal partner, giving himself enough love and affirmation. This is also the first time in Jane's life that someone has complimented her, and it's rare to find a member of the opposite sex whose taste and preferences align so perfectly. This narcissistic attraction transcends conventional ethics, causing John, despite trying to resist, to fall in love with Jane. Meanwhile, Cross, watching from the shadows, seems to have anticipated all of this. While the two continue to act out this bizarre romance, he is still obsessed with the mission to stop the bomber. So he doesn't hesitate to break the rules and travels to New York in 1970 again. Sharp-eyed viewers might recognize that this is the basement where the bomb was disarmed at the beginning of the movie. Since he arrived a few hours early, he encounters the bomber setting the timer. But unfortunately, the other guy seems to know his every move and successfully subdues Cross during their fight. However, the bomber has no intention of hurting him. After knocking him down, he leaves the place alone. When Cross returns to the spot where the bomb was placed, he sees another agent, who came to perform the mission, get injured by the bomb. He cautiously approaches and hands the time machine to the agent. Then, the disfigured agent travels back to 1992. Seeing all this, Cross seems to understand something. He picks up a fragment of the bomb's timer from the ground and returns to 1964, which is 1 year after John and Jane met. He thought he could stop the bomber and change everything this time, but unexpectedly, he failed again. Later, he goes to the hospital nursery to visit Jane's daughter. But at this moment, Robertson suddenly appears there. Cross hands the timer fragment to Robertson. But because Cross's return to the crime scene was an illegal jump, violating the Bureau's regulations, and since the impact of illegal jumps on history directly alters the future, he must form a perfect closed loop to eliminate the effects. Then, under Robertson's orders, Cross puts on gloves, seizes the moment when the nurse leaves to steal Jane's daughter, and uses the time machine to take the baby back to 1945. With a peculiar feeling, Cross leaves the child at the orphanage doorstep, and after leaving, he calls the orphanage director. After doing all this, Cross returns to the car and travels back to 1963, right when John and Jane met. By now, John has already fallen in love with his former female self. John also realizes the man he met is actually himself, but this time, he secretly vows not to abandon Jane. Unfortunately, Cross's arrival shatters all of this. He tells Jane to wait there for his return. John approaches Cross and points his gun directly at him because he thinks Cross played him. But Cross tells him the choice is actually in his own hands and that all of this is inevitable. Then he takes John to 1985 to take over his job. Looking at John lying in bed, sick from the time travel, Robertson can't help but remark that hundreds of crimes will be stopped by him in the future. However, Cross is thinking about the Fizzle bomber still being at large. But Robertson comforts him, saying it's precisely because of the bomber that their work is so outstanding. If not for the bomber, the Bureau wouldn't have grown to this scale. None of this is as simple as imagined. Subsequently, Cross returns to the bar, resigns from his cover job, and uses the time machine to travel to 1975, 1 year before the bomber's final attack. Cross chooses to spend his retirement here. Meanwhile, in 1985, John officially takes over Cross's job. This is something John once dreamed of. He finally found his mission and purpose in life. Years later, John receives a mission. He takes the time machine to 1970. The mission is to disarm a bomb placed by the Fizzle bomber. However, while he is disarming the bomb, a figure suddenly appearing behind him delays his timing. Although he successfully fights off the mysterious man, the short countdown prevents him from getting the bomb into the device in time. This causes John to be injured by the bomb's aftershock. Just as John struggles to retrieve the time machine, Cross, illegally traveling through time, suddenly appears in front of him, hands the case to him, and sends him back to 1992. Although John's life is saved after treatment, the fire damage leaves him completely disfigured. This makes John hold a grudge against the bomber. If he ever gets another chance, he definitely won't let him escape. Before long, John's injuries are mostly healed, but after the bandages are removed, John's appearance has completely changed. Surprisingly, once his hair grows back, he has turned into Cross. After 7 years of service, John is about to retire, but the final mission the Bureau gives him is to go back to 1970 and recruit his past self. John's life thus forms a perfect loop. The only one who jumped out of this loop is the retired John. However, the time machine was supposed to decommission automatically after John traveled to 1975, but unexpectedly, it shows a decommissioning error. At this moment, John suddenly remembers the file folder Robertson gave him before retirement. Inside is the investigation result regarding the bomber's timing device. Looking at the clues, John didn't pay much attention at first, but after spending a month there, he discovers the bomber's movement patterns in the file match his own exactly. With this suspicion, he goes to the laundromat where the bomber last appeared, and sure enough, he finds him there. But what he didn't expect is the bomber has the exact same face as him. It turns out the bomber is his future self. The bomber opposite him knows John's confusion and shock very well, but his mindset now is completely different from before. Although he admits his actions hurt many innocent civilians, he claims his actions indirectly saved even more lives, and he even pulls out newspapers from the future to defend himself. But John tells him that in the next attack, the bomber will kill over 10,000 people. Finally, the bomber tells John that they are actually all Robertson's puppets. Their whole lives have been manipulated by Robertson. If John kills him now, then he will become the next bomber, because that's exactly what he did back then. So he knows this clearly. If he wants to break the loop, John must let him go. But John remembers the choice he was given. If the man who ruined his life appeared in front of him, would he kill him? In the end, ignoring the bomber's warning, John pulls the trigger without hesitation. Little does he know, this act seems to end the bomber, but secretly completes the final step of the Great Loop. Because from that day on, Cross's mental state deteriorates severely. Combined with the brain damage from previous time travels, he is pushed to the brink of a total breakdown. Gradually, he realizes that no matter how hard he tries to change fate, he can never escape the destiny already laid out for him. In the end, the compromised Cross becomes the new bomber. Thus, the Great Loop is complete, and the new cycle begins the moment John wakes up. After becoming an agent, he receives his own time machine from Robertson and, on a future day, walks into the basement from the movie's opening. After the explosion, John suffers severe memory loss and becomes Cross after reconstructive surgery. Later, while executing the recruitment mission, Cross finds John again, takes John back to find his female self, has him conceive a child with himself, then takes himself to the orphanage doorstep, grows up to meet his post-transition self, thus completing an infinite great loop like a Mobius strip. Although the movie ends here, the shock it gave me lingers on. The director actually made a person be their own parents, their own child, and their own lover. Any one of these is mind-blowing enough. But what shocked me even more is the protagonist spending a lifetime trying to break fate, only to find that even the rebellion itself was scripted by fate. And aren't we just the same? The real prison that traps us isn't inescapable destiny, but the belief that we can defy it.